Rise of the Guardians deserves a live-action adaptation because you know what the world needs more of? Live-action adaptations of classic animated films, said no one ever. Or at least, that's what the vocal portion of the internet would try to have you believe. I mean, yes, earlier this year we had Disney's Snow White, which did pretty terrible all around, grossing a miserable $205 million and not even coming close to making back its production budget, let alone the added costs for advertising and whatnot. Therefore, you could be forgiven for assuming that the wider movie-going audience is fatigued by the existence of these remakes. They want new content, not refried nostalgia. Or at least you could have made that case for a month or two, but the perspective is firmly in the review mirror once again for at least a couple of years. After all, in May we saw the release of Lilo and Stitch's remake, which to date has grossed over $1 billion, and well and truly cemented this new era of Disney live-action remakes. And that was just the House of Mouse. Other studios have been getting in on the action too, with Dreamworks releasing a live-action adaptation of How to Train Your Dragon, which has done really well for itself, grossing $589 million, off of a budget of $150 million so far. Yet again, a clear sign there is a wider appetite for this sort of content in the movie-going audience. It really never does get old seeing the same old recycled complaint get slapped down again and again and again. It was even more delicious this time because I'd seen a bunch of people declare that Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon were both not popular enough with the wider audience to justify making a remake in the first place. It seems that these people might just be well and truly out of touch if they weren't able to figure out that both Stitch and Toothless are merch machines and are going to attract that family audience like flies to honey. Why wouldn't they? They are absolutely adorable in every respect. Of course, they'll never acknowledge that this is the case and that they were wrong, and they'll just go right back to ranting about how remakes are preventing poor Disney and Universal Pictures from making real films, blah 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 blah. For the most part, I think that Snow White is going to be the exception to the rule. Pre-COVID, the remakes were breaking the box office again and again and again, and I expect we're going to see a return to that at some point. That was certainly a bit of a side tangent, but I had to get that out. What can I say? I'm kind of sick of people simply shitting on the concept rather than the actual film. People were against Lilo and Dragons from the get-go, before the films even released and they could see what they were like, and I suppose that just got me salty. And this in turn got me thinking, is there room for even more? For a franchise that perhaps didn't get off on the right foot in terms of its animated version? Is there room for a redemption arc of sorts? Of course, we all know that I'm talking about that live-action Rise of the Guardians adaptation, and before you groan and roll your eyes, please just hear me out. Maybe I'll change your mind, maybe not. But maybe I will. First up, we need to decide, would this even be a viable endeavor? Would this make sense for them to make a film like this? Actually, no, first up, we need to acknowledge that this is once again just a video of my demented ramblings as I try to cope with the fact that Rise of the Guardians is not going to get a sequel, it's not going to get a reboot or a TV show, and it's probably not going to be getting a live-action remake no matter what I say. At this point, there's nothing else to do but dream. Anyway, is there any sense in making the movie? When you talk about this, you're pretty much solely talking about the financials of the film and would it make money? Is it worth the risk? That's all the studio cares about. And on the surface of it, if you look at the initial numbers of the animation, I would argue that no, the risk is not worth the reward. After all, the first film grossed $306 million off a budget of $145 million. Under normal assumptions, this would mean that it made a very slim profit and barely broke even. However, the fact that it had high marketing and distribution costs ensured that the film well and truly lost money. I think by the time that all was said and done, the film was well and truly in the red, and it almost sank the studio with hundreds of employees being laid off. That poor performance, combined with the tainted aura around a franchise that almost killed a whole studio that had previously been making a lot of hits and just had a bunch of classic franchises, means that it would be, on the surface of things, hard to justify ever going forward with making this movie. On top of that, would it even make sense to bring back a movie/franchise that isn't even that old to begin with? I mean, the first film only released in 2012. Is that enough time to pass to want a fresh run at the movie? Is there enough nostalgia to carry it? Standard logic would suggest no. No studio would be dumb enough to think that they should take the property that almost killed them and take another run at it. It would be a stupid and foolhardy endeavor that only a smooth brain would suggest. Well, nobody ever accused me of having the most wrinkled brain in the business. The reality is that times have changed in the last decade or so to the point that I honestly think a film like this could work as a cinematic release. That it could be released in cinemas and there'd be a good chance that people would actually go to see it. That it might actually make some more money this time around and not almost murder the studio in its sleep and damage the finances of future projects. Granted, this might be my extreme dose of hopium talking coupled with my lovely rose-tinted nostalgia goggles, but I do think there's a market for this content in this day and age. I mean, let's just take a look at the most recent Disney live-action remake, right? Lilo and Stitch. Before anybody jumps down my throat, no, I don't think that Lilo and Stitch and Rise of the Guardians are on the same level of popularity in any way, shape, or form. Lilo and Stitch is simply so above Rise of the Guardians that any sort of comparison would be ridiculous. However, it does show the power of nostalgia quite well. The original Lilo and Stitch movie probably made a lot less money than you'd expect. I think that nowadays, everybody knows Stitch, and he's among Disney's most lucrative characters when you look at merch sales and other such things, but it wasn't always the case. The first film only made $271 million off a budget of $80 million, which is good, but it wasn't setting the world on fire either. It's an era of animation where Disney well and truly struggled to break the 300 million mark, and could almost never do it. It took them moving to a new style of animation to really start seeing those big time returns at the box office. Where Lilo and Stitch really came to life in a big way was on the home video market, or I guess the streaming market these days. It might seem weird, but I really do miss the days of mass home media. Being able to actually own your copy of the movie, as opposed to being at the whim of streamers who have the rights, and who can put it into the vault for a time if not enough people are watching it. But yes, Lilo and Stitch in the years after its release really built up this huge wave of nostalgia that they were able to cash in on with the 2025 remake to become one of the biggest success stories of the year. Of course, this is an extreme example, but it goes to show what a strong performance on DVD/streaming can do for a film's prospects over the years, and how a fandom can grow and grow for a lesser grossing film years and years after its release. It's the same sort of concept with How to Train Your Dragon a little bit. The first film came out and it did well for itself, no doubt, and the sequels did even better. But Dreamworks has then fallen off a cliff, and so in a lot of ways, it was back to square one for the studio. I mean, if they considered Rise of the Guardians disappointing, the last couple of years must have been miserable for them. Nowadays, only their big name franchises make any money, and even their big hits for original content like Wild Robot are fairly close to disappointing results of yesteryear. But then How to Train Your Dragon's live-action adaptation came out in June, and is almost closing in on $600 million. It really did start extremely strong with a good couple of weekends where it didn't have all that much competition for the target audience, and I think it only fell off so hard recently due to the release of Jurassic World, and then Superman, and now due to the release of Fantastic Four, which kind of gutted the family audience quite a lot. I know it sounds strange to say that Jurassic World has a family audience due to its content and violence, but when I went there were a bunch of kids, what can I say? Kiddies love the dinosaurs, and I can't blame them for that. So a pretty strong performance even with strong competition, and it still surpassed the box office for the first and third films in the trilogy. Can it catch the second movie? Unlikely, but I guess you never really know for sure. All of this kind of shows that you don't need to be a huge billion-dollar smash hit right out of the gate in order to capture that nostalgia market later on. We've seen it time and again. If you let the audience simmer and stew on things, if you let the fan base slowly grow as more and more people and more generations access the film on DVD or streaming, or also just have their own kids that they can drag along to see the movie, you're setting yourself up for big success. Look at the Pixar sequels running during the 2010s. Look at how nostalgia is currently revitalizing the entire animated industry with big-name sequels getting the big bucks. Thus, why couldn't Rise of the Guardians have a similar trajectory? I'll grant you that it's not as popular as some of those franchises in any way, shape, or form, and I wouldn't say it even comes close to How to Train Your Dragon if we're talking about it strictly in terms of its popularity. That being said, it is far more popular than you'd expect for a film of its profile. Anecdotally, my Rise of the Guardians content has always been relatively popular by my standards, but even beyond that, there's such a deep and rich fandom. It might have fallen off a little over the years maybe, but it certainly still exists, and I think they would for sure show up for a movie adaptation. Thus, is it a smart gamble? Maybe. I think you can certainly justify it at the very least. In the end though, there's more to it than just that for me. I simply want them to make the movie because I love this franchise immensely. That's the reality of the situation.
I just think they're neat.
It was a deep and rich world with so much potential, a lot of heart, great characters, great performances, and an interesting world. Apparently at the time, some reviewers said the story was the weak spot of the film. Nah, get the hell out of here with that trash talk. The film is glorious in every respect. I won't hear a word against it now or ever. Thank you very much. What do reviewers know anyway? Every year it feels like they become more pretentious and out of touch, and this is especially true when it comes to animated content. Back on topic though, Rise of the Guardians was so good, and it just didn't pan out the way that it could have, the way that it should have. It has this extended world and universe we never got to see. There are so many other characters that would be intriguing and interesting for potential sequels. It was a unique and fun premise. That's the lesson from the film, have fun. And the film lives its motto. It makes you smile and laugh and could be very emotional at times. We're now 13 years out from the film's release and the studio losing money and downsizing. Many franchises have seen continuation in that time, whether it's through the release of sequels or whether it's through Dreamworks TV shows. Megamind is one such instance. And whilst watching that terrible sequel and show was akin to taking a shower in vinegar, at least it got a continuation. Hell, even Spirit got a reboot, and that was surely less successful than Rise of the Guardians. What gives, man? In the decade since its release, it's clear that nothing's coming. But now I'm desperate for any sort of content, even if it's just the exact same film, but simply in live action. However, just because I'm desperate doesn't mean I'm pulling out all of this stuff as a sad attempt to justify myself. I actually do think the film would translate very well to a live action concept. Mostly though, I'm talking about the visuals, right? Because we've all seen the story, and we've heard the music, and we all loved it. That's why we're here after all, at least that's why I'm here. Yeah, I suppose you would want to tinker a little bit with the script. They made some changes with the How to Train Your Dragon story that were good, but I think they actually needed to add things. Instead, they just slapped on even more action sequences to extend the runtime and called it a day. But if they ever did Rise of the Guardians, I think it would be a chance to explore things in more detail. Who exactly is Pitch Black? What is he? We could see more from the other Guardians and hints at their backstories. Maybe a few other Jack Frost flashbacks. Those are the types of things you should add to bulk out the movie, and even though I do think the narrative side of things for the animation is largely perfect, I do think you'd have to add or change some things to justify making the film to begin with. That being said, whilst the narrative is all well and good, the action and the visuals are what I'd be really keen to see. The dream sand, the wonder of Santa's workshop, the nightmares, and all the ice that Jack makes, both when he's having fun, but then also his epic battles with Pitch Black. Hell, what about that little flying train set carved out of ice that Santa makes when you first meet him? The different character designs, the Easter Bunny's warren, the little eggs running through the spray paint flowers. I'm breaking my own heart by visualizing something that will probably never come to pass. I mean, could you imagine what the budget would have to be and how much CGI they'd have to use? There's realistically no chance that this film is ever going to be made, but I will stand by the fact that it could be an all-timer of a live-action remake if it was given that chance. And so with all that being said, these have been my opinions and I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of the idea of a live-action Rise of the Guardians movie? Do you think the idea has any merit whatsoever? Maybe not. I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.